In football, the name of the game for defense is trying to stop the offense by any means necessary within the confines of the rules. Well, for the Detroit Lions, one now has to ask, what's the name of the game for their defense going into 2024? We're going to talk about it in this episode, folks, so stay tuned.
What are we? What makes us what we are and what we're going to be? It's grit. It's what we started with last year, guys. Doesn't matter if you have one ass cheek and three toes. I will beat your ass.
Can definitely compete with the big dogs.
10-5 end zone touchdown Detroit Lions.
You guys are unbelievable, man. I'm telling you.
We are driven by Detroit.
Hello, Detroit Lions fans, and welcome on back to yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. I'm your host, David T. Pike, and as always, we're diving on in. So, here's the thing, folks. Over the last 3 years, because that's how long it's taken 3 years and over 4 off seasons, the Lions defense, it appears, heavy emphasis on that word, appears to have finally caught up. And, well, let's understand something here. It damn well should have caught up by now. Because over those 3 years, 4 off seasons, the majority of Brad Holmes' draft picks have been used to try and get that defense up to the point where it is right now, to play potential championship level football. We have put a lot of resources, whether it's in terms of free agent money, whether it's in terms of draft picks. And if you think about it, over the course of those 4 off seasons, Brad Holmes made sure, specifically sure, deliberately sure that the defense at every single level, whether it was the line, whether it was the linebackers, whether it was the defensive back room, every single level of the defense was addressed, was revamped, was, taken care of, so that way it could finally play complementary football at a championship level to the offense. Now let's understand something here. That has not been an easy process. In fact, it's been a rather rocky, tumultuous, and I would say for a lot of Lions fans, it's been an extremely irritable process. Because we've had to endure seeing how bad this defense has been over the last couple of years in comparison to an offense that we know is top 5, top 3 in comparison. But now, the hope is, and I would say the expectation, I dare say, is that the defense can finally meet the expectation and the opposite effect of the offense and play at that championship level caliber. Now, many Lions fans have wanted to have some sort of a name, some sort of a nickname, something to connect themselves or to have the name of the Detroit Lions defense kind of be known throughout the NFL. However, though, when you have a nickname, it has to be something that first and foremost makes sense, but it also has to represent what the defense is. You obviously do not want a nickname for a defense that is terrible, which, let's be fair and honest, the last couple of years, our defense has not been very good. Last year, our defense was okay, and that was mostly because we had a ridiculously good run defense. It was absolutely suffocating trying to run the ball against us. And that is why a nickname for the defense of the Lions has not really been able to, kind of come into effect, come into view because, well, we really haven't had a defense that's worth talking about to have a nickname. Whereas the offense of the Detroit Lions, it has its own nickname. It's been called the Goffense, which, well, let's think about it. The reason why it has stuck that way is because the offense of the Detroit Lions, it works around what Jared Goff is really good at, which is running the ball, play action passing, intermediate passing. That is what the Lions offense is primarily focused on, and it works extremely well with how it works within it. And Jared Goff is the quarterback, so, okay, there you go. Kind of makes sense. And that's why that has stuck. But what about the defense? The last time the defense of the Detroit Lions had a nickname of any sort of connotation was way back in the early 2010s, and that was when, at the time, head coach Jim Schwartz named, I believe it was the defensive line of the Detroit Lions defense, Silver Crush, because they had a propensity and a tenacity to get after the quarterback. Well, that nickname of Silver Crush was kind of an expansion of the original Silver Rush defense of the Detroit Lions in the late 1970s and the early 1980s. So let's think about it here. Early 2010s is the last time that there was a defensive nickname for the Detroit Lions. Prior to that, we're talking the early 1980s, late 1970s. So you're talking about a massive gap in time between both of those nicknames. So here comes the question. What actually fits the Lions? Can there be an identity that sticks and is more appropriate for the period of time that we're talking about right now? I believe that there is. And I've talked about it before in a previous episode. That is why I proposed the nickname for the Detroit Lions defense of the 3-1-3 defense. And again, the concept is straightforward, but it fits the Lions. 3-1-3 defense. Okay, the first 3 stands for 3 and out, which is the purpose of every single defense. Number 1 pride. Well, pretty self-explanatory, but we'll explain it anyway here in a moment. And then you have the other 3, which I consider the big 3 Ds of defense. Defend, dominate, destroy. That's your 3-1-3 defense just put into a bit of a nutshell. But despite the clear connection to the Lions, does this identity or nickname that I have established, that I have come up with, deserve to be used for the Lions defense right now? Some fans would argue that until you actually have something established, that you actually have shown it on the field, you've shown it on film, that you've actually got some sort of evidence, you can't really use a nickname. But in my honest opinion, the Lions have already shown some of the, concepts, have already shown some of the basic principles of this nickname, and I believe that it further fits what the Lions are, just as an identity purpose, as an overall concept. And that's what we're going to talk about in this episode today. And this is why I believe that the 3-1-3 defense, it works perfectly for what the Lions have on defense right now. Let's start with it. Let's break it down here. Point number 1. What is the fundamental concept of defense? That's not a trick question. That's just a straightforward, honest question. The answer is to simply put, stop the offense. That is the simple, basic, fundamental concept of a defense. Stop the opposing offense. Well, how do you stop an opposing offense? There are 2 fundamental ways that you can stop an offense in the game of football. You either get a takeaway or a turnover, as it's also called, which you can do via like an interception, a fumble, something like that. The other way that it happens is what is known as a turnover on downs, which is where the defense goes and stops the offense by a 3 and out, and then the defense gets the ball back by the offense punting the ball. So at that point, that's why the 3 and out part for the very first part of the 3-1-3 makes sense, because it's like, hey, 3 and out. Okay, it's a pretty self-explanatory concept. But let's understand something here. Does that actually work with what the Lions defense has already done so far? Well, if we'd have talked about this in 2023 prior to the season, no, it wouldn't have. But after the 2023 season actually concluded, yes, it does. Here's what I mean. If you take a look at the defense of the Detroit Lions' third down conversion percentage rate from 2021, 22, and 23, you're going to see a very clear reason why I'm saying what I'm saying. In 21, the Detroit Lions' third down conversion rate on defense was 45.1%. It was also that in 2022 at 45.1%. The only difference was that the ranking was a little bit worse. It went from 29 to 30, from 21 to 22. Then when you get to 2023, the defense's third down stop conversion percentage rate went through the damn roof in comparison. It went from 45% to 37.5%, and it reflected in the rankings. The Lions went from 30th in the league in 2022 up to 13th in 2023. So as we can clearly see, the Lions' ability to force 3 and outs just last season in general, it jumped substantially by almost 10% and over 17 ranking spots. So think about it. The defense has been getting much more talented over the last couple of years, and it has shown that in last year it was able to stop offenses on third down immensely more, so that way you could get those 3 and outs. That way you could force those punts. That way you didn't have to always focus on trying to get the turnover via a fumble or an interception. So again, that, from my opinion, is this way. This is how I think about this. If the Lions defense last year was able to force 3 and outs at a heavy rate like that, and we've added even more talent to the defense this year, which we got DJ Reader, we added Enos Rakestraw, we added Terry and Arnold, we brought back pretty much the majority of the pieces that we had last year. I can't see any reason why the Lions would not be able to, at the bare minimum, sustain that success, if not get even better. So yes, the first part of the 3-1-3 defense concept, it works here. So that's point number 1. What about point number 2, which is the number 1? Does that work? Well, I would hope so. Otherwise, we would have a massive problem with how the Lions have been going about calling themselves on Twitter and a whole bunch of other places. What does it mean to be a Detroit Lion? What does that actually mean? This is definitely a bit of a tricky question depending upon how you want to try and answer it. But you have to understand the process of this by a few things being kept in perspective, especially when we're talking about a Detroit Lion under Dan Campbell. You have 3 things that I'd like to call it. It's called hard work, toughness, and brotherhood. How do I define that? Well, think about it. Detroit is a blue-collar city. It's the heartbeat of the freaking automotive industry and has long been the lifeblood of the local and state economy here in the state of Michigan and in the city of Detroit. And within the automotive industry, there are people who every single day, they get up, they pack themselves a box lunch, they put on a hard hat, and they go to work. That's their job. That's their life. This imagery is very, very similar to how the Lions go about their business. Because think about it. The Lions players, what do? They get up, they might take a box lunch, they might eat lunch at the facility, whatever the case might be. But how do they go about their business? They don a helmet and they put in the hard work every single day, whether it's in season or out of season. They're going and doing weight training, they're getting exercises in, they're running route concepts, they're doing defensive studies, whatever the case might be. They're all doing that. They're doing that hard work so that way they can play the sport that they love and we get to watch the sport that we love. And then think about this. The city of Detroit, much like the Detroit Lions themselves, have been up and down in terms of the reality that they've been in over the last couple of decades. Think about it. Let's go back to the 1950s and 1960s. That was the prosperity era in the United States. That was the golden era, as people would like to call it. Well, it was also the golden era of the Detroit Lions because in the 1950s, that's when the Lions won those 4 NFL championships. We were living large then. And also, the city of Detroit, the automotive industry was booming. It was great to be in the automotive industry in the 1960s and 50s because you could retire working at GM or Ford by just being in the factories. Then let's fast forward a couple of decades. You get to the early 2000s. You have the dark ages. Why? Well, you have the automotive industry bailout. You have the recession of 2008. You have the 0-16 season of 2008. That would be what I call the dark ages. It definitely fits between both the reality of what's outside of football and inside of football. And then you get to the 2020s, the 2021 to present period. Now we have gotten to what I call the Renaissance period because, what's happening? The city of Detroit is going through a renaissance. Think about it. Back in the early 2000s, it was kind of very well known that if you went to the city of Detroit, Flint, or Pontiac, you might get in trouble, not necessarily in a good way. And you might walk out in a very bad situation. But now, the city of Detroit has gone through a cultural renaissance. It's also gone through a renaissance where, hey, you can walk up and down streets, and you don't necessarily have to be afraid of something happening to you. The same is true for the Detroit Lions. Ever since Dan Campbell, Brad Holmes, Sheila, and all the rest of them have taken over the Detroit Lions, and this new process has taken over the entirety of grit and everything else, the Lions have gone through a massive renaissance of their own. So yes, again, it fits. So for me, it's like, okay, the Lions have often matched the vibe and feel of the city that they represent, as I just clearly demonstrated. And as Dan Campbell has stated, he stated it when he first got here, the city of Detroit, it has been beat down, it has been put down, but it has remained tough, it has remained resilient, just like the Lions. And just like the mindset that Campbell embodies, the city of Detroit embodies, which is grit. And then we get to the last part of this second process of one, brotherhood. Think about it. Brotherhood for a team is one of the most important concepts, one of the most important parts of a team because it's the ability to perform and to also persevere under immense pressure. Because think about it, for the Lions, they have had to rely on each other in this brotherhood that they've had because a lot of people outside of the building have doubted them. Some of our fans doubted them when they first started up. The NFL certainly doubted them when we first started with Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes. They ridiculed them, calling Brad Holmes, not Brad Holmes, Dan Campbell a meathead. And then some of the drafts that freaking Brad Holmes was doing, they thought that he was either reaching or he was getting too arrogant. Again, the Detroit Lions have had to tap into this inner reserve of human spirit and strength to endure through the hard times that they've had to go through the last couple of years to get them to this point. It's no different with the city of Detroit. The city of Detroit has also had to go through this. They have had to tap into themselves. They've had to rely on themselves because the outside world in the U.S. looks at the city of Detroit as a crime-ridden city that can't seem to get things right. But I tell you this right now, you talk to somebody who's lived in Detroit, they are proud of the city of Detroit. They are proud of where they live. They are not going to let that, stigma. They're not going to let that portrayal that the media and people outside of the city are going to have. They're going to be like, listen, we have persevered. This is our city. This is our home. We're going to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps to, get through the dark times, which is why we're at the period we are right now. So all of the things that I'm talking about, brotherhood, everything that I've talked about in this entire segment, All of these things embody how the Lions in the city of Detroit are much like a pride of Lions. And we are all one. And we will have each other's backs. And as such, the one pride part for the 3-1-3 defense, it is extremely important for the 3-1-3 defense and also for the city of Detroit, because that is what makes Detroit, to be one, to be together, to have everybody's back. That is what it means to be a Detroit Lion. It all fits together. So that's the second part of the 3-1-3 defense. Now we get to the third part, which is the other three. This is one of my favorite parts of this entire concept of the 3-1-3 defense. Defense is at its very core meant to be a physical and nasty group. If you play defense, or if you play defense, it is very physical, it's very nasty. You are trying to impose your will, you are trying to hurt somebody without necessarily, physically like doing so in a very harmful manner. Like you're trying to get their attention with pain, but you're not trying to like break them. Well, think about it. Defense is meant to beat down your opponent physically, mentally, and possibly even, yes, spiritually. As a defender, you are wanting to set the tone and impose your will on the opposing offense opposite of you. Well, think about it. This is why, for me, the 3 Ds of the defense part of this, 3-1-3 defensive concept that I'm talking about are perfect for the description of the Lions' 3-1-3 defense. Defend. Pretty self-explanatory. The definition is in the word. As a defense, your job is to defend. Your job is to stop the opposing offense from scoring points. So you're going to defend your turf. Okay, let's move on to the second D. Dominate. I literally just explained this. Again, the whole concept of defense is you are trying to dominate the opposing offense. You're trying to break them in a sense of, break them mentally, break them spiritually. You're trying to stop them physically with pain. You're trying to do anything you can to get your will imposed upon the opposing offense by dominating them. And then we get to destroy. Destroy really took on a different kind of concept before I wrote this, because when I wrote the notes originally, we hadn't gotten to the whole thing about what Ali McNeil and DJ Reader had talked about, how when they see stuff going forward into this year, they see nothing but pure destruction. But again, think about it. When you call back to what Dan Campbell's play style is as being a physical football team, you take a look at the fact that the team never quits. They're never scared of an opponent. It doesn't matter who they are or how good they are or how people have talked them up. It also highlights the unrelenting and aggressive nature that the team has, and also that Aaron Glenn is trying to put into the defense this year. Again, being more aggressive, bringing more blitzes, being more in your face with man coverage. This whole concept of destroy, it fits exactly what the Lions are trying to do this year. They are trying to destroy opponents in any way they can by being aggressive, by being physical, in your face, dominating you, defending against you. It all works together. It is all combined into that one singular defining point. So again, it definitely makes sense. But again, is there any proof of this from what we saw last year? There definitely is proof. Think about it. It was on display in 2023. The Lions were the number 1 defense in both total quarterback pressures and also in pressure percentage rate. They had 187 pressures. They had a high of 28.2 pressure percentage rate. They were the number 1 defense in QB hurry defense and also in QB hurry percentage. 74 quarterback hurries with an 11.2% QB hurry rate. They were tied first in quarterback knockdowns and second in quarterback knockdown percentage, 72 and 12.2%. And they were the number 2 rush defense in total yards given up and the number 3 rush defense in terms of yards per attempt given up, 1,509 yards for a 3.7 average. Think about it. The elements that I just talked about show a defense that is extremely tenacious, it's relentless, and it continues to have a seek and destroy mindset that has been embodied and has been continually reinforced by Dan Campbell and, yes, Aaron Glenn. The defense, I expect to continue to do that going into 2024, but I expect that they're not only going to continue that seek and destroy mindset, they're going to be even better at it, because I believe that the pass defense is going to catch up with the run defense and being able to shut down passing games just as well as we can shut down the running games because of all the investments and additions that we've made this offseason. So my whole point is this. As we can clearly see, as I have demonstrated, the 3-1-3 defense not only applies, but it definitely, absolutely defines the defensive mindset and style that Dan Campbell and Aaron Glenn have and want. It may or may not catch on. I don't know. I'm not the guy that, just decides to make nicknames out of the air and it automatically catches on. That's up to the rest of the fan base and also the Lions if they like it. But I'm going to tell you this right now. In my mindset, the 3-1-3 defense that I'm talking about, it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. I can't think of a better nickname for the overall concept of the defense. I know that one of the Lions came out with a nickname for Terry and Arnold by calling him Sub-Zero. Hell, have Sub-Zero as his nickname and the rest of the Detroit Lions defense be called the 3-1-3 defense. I think that'd be awesome. But my whole point is this, that as long as Campbell remains the coach of the Detroit Lions, the 3-1-3 defense will endure. It shall endure. Because there's no way that Dan Campbell is ever going to stop being aggressive. There is no way Dan Campbell is ever going to stop being physical. And as long as he's here, the elements, the tenets of the 3-1-3 defense shall live. But anyway, having said that, I think I've done a pretty good job of explaining the episode, explaining my thought process, so I'm going to end the episode and say thank you all for watching another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. If you like what you saw, by all means, I highly encourage y'all to watch the next episode. Also encourage y'all to do one of these three things: like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. If by chance you subscribed in the past, you forgot to do so at the time, or you just subscribed and you not had a chance to do so, again, I highly encourage y'all to subscribe. It helps out the channel. But I also encourage y'all, please make sure you also turn on that bell notification icon as well, so that way you guys never miss any more content that I push out. Again, the more that icon gets turned on, the more you guys will know as soon as I release something, you guys can come right back to the channel. Also encourage y'all to share the content with your Lions friends and family members. Share it here on YouTube, share it on Twitter, share it on Facebook, share it anywhere and everywhere you possibly can with everybody and anybody that you can. The more we share it, the greater the channel grows and spreads, but it also has a much higher reach to bring in new people to the channel, and that's what we're trying to do. I just want to say to everybody, I hope y'all enjoyed the content. I'm glad that you watched it. Thank you all for everything that you do. I hope y'all have something in your life that makes you happy and makes you smile. And with that being said, God bless, and until the next time we meet, I'll see you all in the next episode.